Hello, can you guys hear me? Morning, all.
Morning.
How was your guys' weekend?
Too short.
Too short? Isn't it always too short?
Yeah.
Where are the rest of your colleagues? Hey, Olivia.
Yeah.
Have you been in contact with Jason, Alyssa, and Blair about the genetically engineered organism
I've talked to
project?
I've talked to Jackson a little bit, but I haven't with Alyssa or any of those yet. But I'll
Okay. It's not your responsibility. I'm just curious as to how you guys have been communicating with one another or not.
Me and Jackson talk often, but I'll probably create an email with the others soon.
Okay. All right. Not everybody is here, but there are now enough of us here. So today, what I asked you to do was to reread chapter 1 from Michael Pollan's book and read into chapter 2. And the reason I wanted to pause here is because we've kind of finished the section on genetics. And that kind of finishes up material that was in chapter 1 of Michael Pollan's book. And I want you to go back and just revisit some of the topics in there so that they're firmly established in your brains. And then chapter 2 deals with things that are going to be coming up in the next section of material. So what we have between now and the next exam, which is, I believe, October 16th, is a section, kind of an extended section on nutrient cycling. And nutrient cycling comes up in chapter 2 of Pollan's book, kind of in the middle to latter part of the chapter. And so I want us to spend some time talking about Pollan's book from that perspective before we jump into that. So what I've done, if you go and look on the Moodle site on today's date, there is a folder, and inside that folder is a set of discussion questions that are based on chapter 1 and chapter 2. I suspect that the chapter 1 stuff you'll move through fairly quickly, and the chapter 2 stuff may take you a little longer. When about 15 minutes are left in class, we'll come back together, but we'll spend most of today in breakout rooms. When I would break you up into small groups to work, if we were in a physical class together, I would just freely circulate around the room, and I would just come up and sit down next to your group, and I would listen to what was being said. I might ask a question or two, or make a comment, or answer any questions that you might have that could come up while I wasn't there. And then after a few minutes, I'll just get up and go to another group. And so I'll probably do the same thing. Well, I plan on doing the same thing with these groups here. So when I put you in breakout rooms, I can move freely from room to room. And so when I arrive, it's probably going to give you a little thing in your ear that says this session is being recorded, but the fact of the matter, it's been being recorded the whole time. It's just that I have arrived there. Just ignore me, continue with what you were talking about when I arrived. And if I have something to say or add, or if you have any questions for me, you can ask me at that point. But just behave as if I had come up and sit down next to you if we were in a classroom. And then after I've heard enough, or have answered whatever questions you might have, I'll just exit and go and sit in on another group. So any questions? All right, then I am going to, let me make sure that I have all of the options here. All right, I'm going to send you guys off to your rooms, and you can chat freely. Winston, you should have gotten an invitation to breakout room 3. Winston? Yeah, there you go.
Everyone's getting to the questions right now. We haven't really started.
All right.
Mr. Klawinski, are we supposed to write these in our notebooks?
You should definitely be taking notes. These are
Okay.
the kinds of questions that appear on exams from.
Okay. I just didn't know if you wanted us to write the answers somewhere.
You're not going to turn anything in. This is basically for your benefit to make sure that you're reading the exam and that you're paying attention to the kinds of things that I think are important for you to be paying attention to.
Okay.
You guys want to start at the top or just find random ones?
Start at the top. I think I found the first one.
Okay. I don't have my book on me, so.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I think it's, well, you guys don't have your books, right?
No.
Okay, well,
I'm going off
the
of
first
school
one,
memory right now.
yeah. The first one, whenever he talks about deconstructing a chicken nugget, I'm pretty sure it's whenever he talks about how corn is what feeds the pig. So basically, there's corn in it.
Well, why would there be pig in a chicken nugget?
Oh, chicken.
I
Sorry.
think you just misspoke. Chicken.
Yeah, I'm trying to read this. It's weird.
I mean, if you just deconstruct the chicken nugget just off knowledge, I don't have my book to reference at all right now. So, like all the machinery, everything that goes into creating a chicken nugget, whether it's from like McDonald's or Burger King or whatever. Like there's a lot that goes into it.
I think the main point is just that the corn feeds the chicken, and then that's basically how it's involved in the chicken nugget.
Well, it goes beyond that. The information is on page 18 of the book. I realize, Mackenzie, you say you don't have your book with you.
No,
the moment,
so I have a presentation right after this, so I'm up in Peter's Theater.
You're where?
But I'm in Peter's Theater, the Browning Hall.
Oh, gotcha. So anyway, it's midway down the page on page 18 for future reference when you get to your book. But it goes beyond just feeding the chickens. What else is in a chicken nugget?
The breading that's around it.
The
The
oil.
breading, the oil that it's fried in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like everything about the chicken nugget is corn in one way or another. The adhesives that hold the pieces of chicken together are corn based. The breading on the outside, the oil that it's boiled in, et cetera. So that's kind of his point. All of these things that even it says even the citric acid that keeps the nugget fresh can be derived from corn. So that is what he's getting at.
Okay, well, I guess we can go on number 2.
Well, so what does it say about food sciences and how we altered the very concept of what food is?
Like looking at the picture of how like corn was back when it first started like growing into how it is today, I think it's like if humankind isn't like interacting with it, I don't think it would be as stable as it is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that. But Mr. Kowinski?
Yeah.
I have a question for the corn walking.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, question number 2. So, on my test, I answered and said, like, pretty much, like, corn is everywhere. We eat corn. So, like, corn walking, you know, like, blah, blah. And then you said, how do we know that we're corn walking? So, how do we know that we are corn walking? And what 100% is the definition of corn walking?
So basically what he talks about in this section of the book labeled corn walking is that the Mayans, which are the people who developed corn first, they think of themselves as the people of the corn. But in the book chapter, and this is over on page 19 and 20 of the book, he makes a point that because our diet is so based in corn in the United States, that when we look at the stable isotopic signature that we have and compare that, for example, to Mayan people, to people who live in Central America, what you find is that we have more C13 in our tissues and our cells than Mayans do. And so we are more corn walking than even the people of the corn. And so the evidence that we're corn walking comes from these carbon ratios, the ratios of C12 to C13. And because of the photosynthetic pathway, the C4 photosynthetic pathway, that basically captures all of the carbon dioxide that it takes in, both the light isotopes and the heavy isotopes, we can see that we are corn walking in our isotopic signatures, which are different from human beings that don't have a diet that is based so much in corn. And that comes through on page 20 and 21 of the textbook. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense now.
All that time that we spent on C3 and C4 photosynthesis was to give you the scientific background of understanding page 19, page 20, and page 21 of Poland's book.
Okay.
Seems like a lot of work to understand 3 pages of text, but without that knowledge, you don't really understand why C4 plants would fix more heavy isotopes of carbon. And as a result, it's impossible for you to make sense of all of that stable isotope ratio stuff that's there on page 20.
Okay.
You want to move on to question 4?
Alyssa. You are not assigned to a room. Let me get you assigned to a room real quick. Alyssa, I sent you an assignment to a breakout room. Join them there in progress.
They also do crop rotation now too, to keep the nutrients fresh in the soils.
Yeah.
So they're specialized, but they're also doing overturn.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next question is, who was Fritz Haber? What is he known for accomplishing? When did he do this work? And how was it all applied? And did he receive any accolades for this work?
Oh my gosh, are you guys jumping around, or have you been through all the other questions?
We've been through all the other ones.
Holy crap. All right. Did you guys go through those well?
Yes.
I think so.
Okay. I wasn't here to listen. All right, continue. Fritz Haber. Haber is how they would pronounce it. He's a German dude.
Yeah. I remember reading that he did the whole, he figured out how to fix nitrogen or create synthetic nitrogen, where you split the nitrogen apart and pair it with a hydrogen. And I think he was the one who could he worked with the Nazis during World War II, and he created a lot of explosives and stuff. So he did some really bad stuff with his work, but he also ended up helping agriculture a lot. And so they're kind of saying the same guy, same work, and the two different ways it was used.
Yeah, so ammonia, which is the basis of ammonium nitrate, it's not only the substance that we use in agriculture for fertilizer, but it's also one of the big components of gunpowder. So the ability to create that synthetically rather than going someplace and mining it or something like that was a huge advance, both for agriculture but also for the production of munitions. And then there was also the whole Zyklon B thing.
Yep.
So is he? I don't know if I read it right, but did he come up with nitrogen fixation basically? Or is that not is that a different thing?
Yeah, industrial nitrogen fixation. So some plants have bacteria in their roots that do this. We'll talk about this, as the week rolls on. So some bacteria do this, and then they have association with plants, and then the plants benefit from the nitrogen. But the trick has been humans have never been able to do this very well until Haber came along and invented a process for doing this synthetically, industrially.
Okay.
And then did he receive any accolades? Didn't he receive the Nobel Prize?
He did receive the Nobel Prize in chemistry for nitrogen fixation.
Okay.
For basically inventing the Haber-Bosch process. And, this is one of those situations where, you have to it's a difficult world that we live in that you have this guy who, came up with the industrial mechanism for creating ammonium nitrate that basically in many ways set the stage for World War I and World War II. Without the ability to manufacture ammonium nitrate, you wouldn't have had munitions production that would be capable of fueling global scale wars. But then you also wouldn't have had, the Green Revolution of the mid 20th century, where agricultural productivity went way up because we had things like insecticides and synthetic fertilizers. Many of the insecticides that we used during the Green Revolution of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s were basically developed as pesticides, but in many cases, so in the case of Zyklon B, that was originally developed as a pesticide, but that didn't stop it from being repurposed by the Nazis. Zyklon B is basically what they used in the gas chambers at Auschwitz, a form of cyanide. And so these things that could be used to kill insects could also be used to kill human beings, and were used in chemical warfare during World War I. Between World War I and World War II, chemical warfare was outlawed, but that didn't stop people like Hitler using those same chemical warfare agents against his own people, in the same way that Saddam Hussein used chemical warfare against his own people. So you give somebody a Nobel Prize for this great advancement to agriculture, not recognizing in the awarding of the award that it also probably contributed to the ability to wage global scale war, and you also are ignoring all of the other things that the person did that had been repurposed by really, really bad people. So one of the things that's tricky about all of this is that we don't live in a really black and white world. We live in a world of nuance. And this is one of those situations where you have to really engage with the nuance of this particular person's mark on history. Difficult conversations with Klawinski. Continue.
So did they
go ahead.
Know that he had done that his work had been used when he got the prize?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think Haber ever made any secret of it. I mean, this stuff was all published in the scientific literature. Anybody, for that matter, could have repurposed Zyklon B for those purposes. It just so happens that they did it in Germany. And so, yeah, that's the thing about science. Science gets published widely. Then the question is, well, what do you do with that science? Do you do good things with that science, or do you do hideous things with that science? Science is really kind of neutral in terms of the end application of things in many cases. Oftentimes people go looking for answers to questions simply because they're driven by the question. Then if somebody comes along and decides to apply that in a way that you didn't intend, you sometimes don't really have any control over that. And if that wasn't your intention in the first place, once again, Haber was a chemist who was interested in problems of agriculture. And so when he developed that, he intended it to be used on pest insects, not necessarily humans. Because who would do that? And I don't really know the degree to which he was cooperative and complicit with the Nazis. All I know is that they used things that he developed for not so good ends. We live in a gray world, not a black and white world. Continue. I'll go lurk someplace else.
Okay.
Alright, so corn productivity, with everything like genetics and everything. Obviously, he showed the examples in class with the corn and how they've gotten more kernels on each cow since back then. So bushels per acre has definitely increased since 1920s.
Mackenzie, I'm having trouble understanding you.
I have to wear my mask because I'm in a building.
Ah.
So,
Can you just repeat it real quick?
the bushels per acre since the 1920s has increased. I mean, when he showed the examples in class of the corn and everything, whether it's corn, soybeans, whatever it is, they've all increased since the 1920s due to genetic engineering.
So in chapter 2, it talks about productivity. Where was it? Oh yeah, so in the 1920s, it was about 20 bushels per acre. What is it now?
On that page.
Page 36 and 37.
$70 to $80, wasn't it?
180 bushels per acre on Naylor's farm.
How they scheme.
I looked
Oh,
up the
in
average
50s,
for Iowa
and then
and it's 203.
So what was that, Mackenzie?
The average for Iowa is 203.
Oh yeah, so this was published back in 2006. So this book is 14 years out of date from that perspective. So what Poland is claiming is back then it was 180 bushels of corn per acre, but in 1920 it was about 20 bushels per acre. So that's a ninefold increase.
Mm-hmm.
And then according to you, it's actually gone up since then as well.
Diversity. I don't remember what the book says, but I mean, a lot of farms, they rotate their crops. Like one field will be corn one year, one field will be soybeans, one field could be, I don't know, but I know they rotate them, and just a lot of farms have corn, soybeans, and like milo or wheat or something.
Yeah, why do they rotate soybeans through? It's not one of the questions on the sheet, but it's good to know.
Soil deficiencies, that way it can replace nutrients in soils.
Yeah, and so soybeans are a legume, they fix nitrogen, and so that puts nitrogen back in the soil. And corn actually happens to be a crop that requires quite a lot of nitrogen.
I can't look at that section to reference it, but
well, I guess we probably can't do the next one because it's talking about a specific section, unless you guys remember.
Why do you guys not have books?
I don't have mine because my roommate, he just got tested for COVID, so I haven't been in the room for like a couple days.
Ah, stinker.
Yeah.
Branson, are you the one who borrowed my book at the beginning of the semester, or was that somebody else?
That was not me.
That was not you. I
No.
need to track my book down. I don't recall who it was though. I have to go dig back through my emails. So Blake, did you have your book?
Yeah.
All right. Well, you guys can talk about the question. It's just Blake is going to have to help you out a lot. Although you guys should have read the book over the weekend, hopefully. Except Branson, have you really not been able to go back to your room at all?
No, I just want to stay away because it'll be contact tracing, so then I'll have to go home too.
Yeah. Where are you living?
Melrose.
Did they give you another room?
I'm just in one of my friend's room right now, and then driving back and forth from actual home.
All right. I have another copy of the book at home. I'll try and remember to bring it to school tomorrow. Maybe I can loan it out. But I'm going to run out of copies of the book here soon. All right. This section about Bull Shoals plant, what's that about?
Olivia ran to the restroom, so we're waiting for her to get back.
Okay, I was about to say, Olivia's just had enough of you guys and said, screw this, I'm gone.
Sorry, I had to go to the restroom.
Yeah, he just joined.
Too much coffee. Sorry.
That's fine. I just happened to hop back in and you're gone. And I'm like, oh, look at that. She's like had it with this.
God. Well, I said, no, not today. Okay, do you want to talk about why Poland says that the corn is married to man? Gonna jump down again? Okay.
By the way, that married to man, that's Poland's terminology. I would never say something so sexist.
I think that he's using that terminology just because I think he's saying man in like kind of a origin of all humankind, just considering how much corn and humans rely on each other kind of in a way.
Yeah, so, and even more so than that, so yes, he's using the term man to refer to mankind, or you could say humankind, but yeah, in the year 2020, we might not use that particular phrase. So yeah, there's all sorts of, it's amazing how much gendered language there is out there.
It's evolved so much over the years, which is a great thing.
Yeah. So anyway, so it's not so much that we're dependent upon corn, but corn is dependent upon us. How is corn dependent upon us?
I mean, I think because like we're the ones who produce it, and we're the ones who are using it to make food or eat it. And if we don't do that, then corn is pretty much just corn. It's like not used, you know.
So it goes beyond that though. So if you took an ear of corn and just planted it in the ground, what would happen? And Poland actually uses this very example in the book.
If I took corn and planted it in the ground?
Took an ear of corn and planted it in the ground. Just ripped an ear of corn off the plant and planted it in the ground.
Would it regrow?
No, it would not. Why not?
It doesn't have the proper parts to grow.
What do you mean by that, Olivia?
Like it doesn't have like the female and the male parts.
Okay, so the male and female flowers are separated, but it's a wind-pollinated species anyway, so it would probably get pollinated if we just left it alone. But once the ear of corn forms, why is that thing not viable to produce new corn plants?
I don't know.
Any of you guys football fans?
Yeah.
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 What's the University of Nebraska's mascot? It's the most ridiculous, one of the most ridiculous mascots on the planet.
Cornhuskers.
What is a cornhusker, Marcus?
I have no clue.
I mean, their mascot looks like, I mean, it's like a little boy in overalls with an N on his chest. So like,
Yeah.
Oh, you said like, what does it look like? Oh, yeah, that's what. It looks
No.
like.
What? So what does a cornhusker do?
my inference is, would it be someone who like takes care of the corn?
Not taking care of the corn. Did you guys ever go to the store and buy corn on the cob, or go to the farmer's market and buy corn on the cob?
Yeah.
What do you have to do to prepare corn on the cob?
Shuck it.
What's that?
Just shuck it.
You have to shuck it, or I don't refer to it as shucking. Shucking is what you do to oysters. What you do is you husk corn. So, Olivia, describe what husking corn is about.
You're gonna take off the outer layers and take off the silk.
Yeah, you have to get rid of all of those leaves. So the seeds of corn are on a cob, but that cob is wrapped in multiple layers of leaves. So if you just took that ear of corn and plunked it in the ground, it would just all be contained within those leaves still. Why did humans select corn that had the kernels of corn wrapped up in leaves? Like, why would you do that? Were they thinking way ahead? So, we'll make corn so that you have to husk it, so someday a football team can have a really stupid mascot. Like, it's so bizarre. The Nebraska Cornhuskers, whoa, go husk that corn. Like, why would we be afraid of that? It's kind of like having a cardinal as a mascot. It's like a little seed-eating songbird. What's it going to do to you? I love giving people grief over team mascots. Anyway, why would humans have chosen that particular characteristic as a characteristic that was good and valuable to have in a plant like corn?
Maybe protection. I don't know.
What does a plant want to do with its seeds generally?
Spread them.
Yeah, it generally wants to release them. And there are all sorts of mechanisms in plants that are designed to get the seeds away from the parent plant. But the problem with that is that if you're trying to harvest that plant and harvest that plant seeds for food, you don't want them to get dispersed from the parent plant. You want them to stay with the parent plant. And in this case, the way they achieved that was basically by selecting corn that essentially had these leaves that went around the ear, such that the corn kernels don't escape. And if you've ever eaten corn on the cob, the corn kernels are actually pretty firmly attached to the cob, if you've ever eaten corn on the cob. So those are all characteristics that are designed to keep the seeds in a place where humans can then harvest them and make use of them, such that even if you left corn standing in the field, because that corn is wrapped up in those leaves and because those kernels are so firmly attached to the cob, those seeds will never come free, and as a result, they'll never germinate. They'll just be stuck on the cob. I was doing yard work this weekend, and we had some corn in our backyard garden, and some of the ears didn't get very big, and so we just kind of left them on the stalk. And I guess when we tore down the stalks, one of the ears came off, and so in the yard there was a cob of corn just laying, an ear of corn just laying on the ground. And I don't know, it was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago that we pulled down those last corn stalks, and it was still just laying there on the ground with most of its kernels intact, attached to the cob. And so, yeah, if not for humans, it would never germinate again because its seeds would be just permanently attached to the cob. So even though humans may depend upon corn a lot, if not for its ally, the human, corn itself would not be capable of propagating itself any longer. It may be able to do corn sex just fine, but it wouldn't be able to produce new corn plants very easily. So in that way, it's married to man.
Gotcha.
I'm going lurking. Are you guys done or still working?
We just finished.
We had a
I think
question.
we're like looking over project stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. You'll notice I put you together in the groups that you are in for your genetically engineered organism groups, just to get you guys to get to know one another a little better. So do you have any questions about any of these things?
I have a question about the project.
Well, that's not what we're talking about right now, Mary. Do you have any questions about these questions?
I could do a little more clarification on like the New Deal, because I know it was kind of like, I know essentially it was just like pretty much more government involvement in farms, but
Oh, there's a huge amount of government involvement in all aspects of society.
yeah. So
because
like,
what was the reason? What was the justification for that government involvement?
so what I got from it, I thought it was like their more involvement was to make the farms more like corporate farms, and the government had more say in like what farmers were to grow as far as what specific crops.
No, not really. So when did the New Deal come around? What president's administration was the New Deal during?
Was it Roosevelt?
It was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, not Teddy Roosevelt. You got to be careful with the Roosevelts. There are too many of them running around. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when was he elected to office?
The late 20s or the 30s. I can't remember for sure.
Early 30s, 1932, the election of 1932, if I'm recalling correctly. We can always Google him and make sure that we're getting our dates straight, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Yeah, so he served from March of 1933 to April 12th of 1945 when he died. So he was elected in the election of 1932 and started serving in 1933. That was back when inauguration didn't occur until March. So what was going on in the nation during this time period?
Great Depression.
And this was the Great Depression. So the New Deal was actually a whole suite of programs that were designed to get Americans back to work. And so there were jobs programs, the Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps. There were also banking reforms because during the crash of 1929, there was a run on the banks because people were worried about them losing their money. And so that's where the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was formed. This is a program by which the first $10,000 that you have deposited in a bank is guaranteed by the government. So if you have more than $10,000 in a bank, you need to put it in another bank because anything above $10,000 won't be insured by the government. So the FDIC is a part of that. Social Security grew out of that because before the Great Depression, if you had any sort of retirement funds at all, they were held up in company pensions. And when companies went under, well, so did your pension go away. And so Social Security was a way of ensuring people had income after they stopped working as they got older that wasn't necessarily tied to your employer's pension plan. So Winston, lots of things across all of society were under this general heading of New Deal programs. There was a lot of infrastructure building as a part of that. So the Works Progress Administration was in charge of doing things like building hydroelectric dams. Hoover Dam was a part of this. The Civilian Conservation Corps There used to be a CCC camp right here on the edge of campus. If you go back and look at old USGS maps, you can see that on the ones from the 1940s, it has marked on there where the Civilian Conservation Corps camp was. It was over where the cross-country track used to be. And they were in charge. So Civilian Conservation Corps, if you go to national parks and you see these beautiful old buildings that serve as park headquarters and things like that, those were all built by the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Depression. Highways were built, dams were built, bridges were built, and all of these public works were basically government expenditures designed to put people back to work. And so in all of this was also farm-related assistance and regulations and things like this. Prior to the Depression, farmers were already experiencing declining value of farm commodities because productivity was going up simply because of better technology and better growing techniques and things like this. And also the overseas markets were kind of drying up for US goods, mainly because of political changes going on in Europe. So farmers were already struggling before the Depression in terms of getting decent prices for their goods. And so one of the set of New Deal programs that was designed to kind of prop farmers up was to basically create strategies by which they could still make money while taking some of their acreage out of production. When you take farmland out of production, the supply of food goes down. And as the supply of food goes down, the price of that food goes up. And so they could sell the crops that they had at a higher price and in theory, make more profit out of it. So that was one aspect of the New Deal programs. Other aspects of the New Deal programs had to do with how you financed farming. In the old days, before the New Deal, you would go to a bank and you would get a loan, and that loan would pay for the next year's crop. And then if you had a crop failure, the bank would just come and take your farm, which was not so good. But after the New Deal came about, what would happen is those loans were no longer offered by private banks. They were offered by private banks that were basically, those loans were guaranteed by the federal government, so that if you defaulted on your loan, the bank didn't come and take your farm. The government would pay that loan off to the bank, but then as a result of that, it would also then go and take whatever crop that you had as collateral, as taking the collateral for the loan. And so you could be involved in farming, and if you suffered a bad year, you didn't necessarily lose your farm, you just lost that year's profit. Much in the way that you guys have student loans. You guys, how many of you have student loans?
Yes.
Kenton, you have a student loan. Why would a bank give you a loan?
Because my family's credit history was good, I guess.
No.
Okay. So they anticipate you getting a job once you're done with college, and then you paying them back once you have an income?
They anticipate you getting a job and having an income and paying that back. But why would a bank take that risk? I mean, right now you're just a college student. You sit around listening to people like me all day. You have no prospects for paying that back as it exists right now. Why would a bank take that kind of risk on you guys?
Because it's all backed by the Fed.
It's all guaranteed by the federal government. So you have a federally guaranteed student loan in the same way that they were making federally guaranteed loans to farmers. A bank will loan you guys money because if something happens and you can't pay it back, your credit is damaged because you got this loan and you never paid it back. But the bank doesn't lose any money because the government will then pay for your loan. And when I say the government, throughout this class, when I say the government, I mean the taxpayers. So don't default on your loan because I then have to help pay it back. And I'd rather not do that. So these federally guaranteed loans, whether it's a loan to a farmer or a loan to a college student, banks are willing to go into those things because they know that if something goes wrong and the person defaults, they're still going to get paid the principal and interest back on the loan. But they are banking on you paying your loan back. So the way in which farming got financed also changed during the New Deal. And so the Soil Conservation Service was working with farmers to take acreage out of production to reduce overproduction, which then elevated prices. And then there was this new way of funding agriculture that was run more by the government rather than by private banks, that then allowed farmers to stay in business even if they experienced 1 or 2 bad years of production. The other thing that they did was they put together this thing called the Ever Normal Granary. What is the Ever Normal Granary? It's mentioned in the book. I will leave you with that question.
Alright, what's the actual music?
Jackson, are you and Olivia in the same room? Unmasked, sitting closer than 6 feet from one another?
No, we're across the table.
Okay. You know, President Trump is in a hospital because he was not socially distant enough and wasn't masked. Just saying. All right. You guys, whoa, wow, what's that? Did you guys find that time productive or not?
Yeah, I did. I think it was, we got through the questions kind of fast. 'Cause, I mean, some of them were pretty much discussion questions, but other ones you can answer kind of quickly.
Okay.
I think it was a lot of time, but I do think it was productive.
Okay. All right. Do you have any questions about anything that you guys talked about? Okay, let's talk about the exam. I wasn't super pleased with the exams as I was going through and grading them. But that's the weird thing about grading. Sometimes you kind of get in the zone of grading what you're grading at the moment, and you don't have the context. So you guys didn't really do any worse than, for example, last year's group did on the first exam, but I probably actually had the same sort of conversation with them last year. So hopefully you had some time to think over the weekend, reflect on your exam. The key to the exam is up, so you can check, you know, your answers versus the answers that I was kind of hoping for. What can we do to help you learn the material better so that you can not only just perform better on exams, but also have a better facility with the information? Just everybody unmute yourselves and we'll just kind of have a round robin here.
The only thing for the exam for me, I would say, is I already know I said that I kind of ran out of time at the end, but I've talked to some other people and they said the same. So maybe if, I don't know, maybe if I had like 10 minutes more, just a little bit longer. I don't know how all the other exams are going to go, but if they're similar, I feel like we could use just a little bit more time.
Yeah, I kind of had the same issue because I once, after I got my test back, I think the last two questions and then there's on the second to last page that I didn't get to. And I think that's where a lot of my points that were counted off came from. So I think if I had time to finish them, my score would have been a little higher than it was.
Okay, so there's technically not anything scheduled in theory after this exam, so we could extend the time period a little bit when we're in class. So I did extend it a little bit because I was concerned about issues with getting it uploaded and stuff like that. But we could in theory make the time limit 75 minutes versus 65 minutes, given that there isn't a class scheduled after that. Normally I wouldn't be able to do that because I would have to give everybody the same amount of time. And if somebody had a class right after, then that would negatively affect them in theory. So yeah, that's an easy thing to do. What else? But that's more of a test-taking environment issue rather than a learning issue.
Yeah.
I personally think conversation's important. I learned through conversation, just being able to communicate with others, and like in this environment, it's very hard to do such, considering the fact that not a lot of people are talkative in this environment, and I feel awkward asking questions when no one else is talking. So like maybe implementing the area or space for us to be able to communicate easier and better would be more valuable.
So what makes you uncomfortable online?
Like, I just don't feel like anybody communicates during our class time. So like if I take the initiative to communicate, I feel out of space.
Oh my gosh, how many times do I ask you questions and I'm greeted with nothing but silence?
All the time.
All the time. Okay, all right. So there are a couple of ways of dealing with this. One is to not meet online, and I think when I mentioned this last week, Olivia was like, "Yeah, let's not meet online." But there's no guarantee that simply because we're in the same room with one another that you're going to be more. So, is Mackenzie saying something?
No, I'm in a public area.
Okay, all right. So I guess what I would say is if we're going to take the added risk of meeting in the same room with one another, I really need you guys to up your game in terms of your kind of engagement in the moment.
I feel like one thing we could do that's not meeting in class, because personally I think I'd do fine with the online class, is maybe set up like they're in the PLC right now. If like we have an optional thing where if some people want to go and talk about maybe before the test and just talk about things they aren't clear on, or just maybe study for the test, I feel like that could help. Or not even just for the test, but just outside of class.
Something where you're talking to one another, or something where I'm there with you?
Basically, if you're there with us.
Oh yeah.
Maybe
okay.
just like I don't know.
Okay. So
Just because I feel like the class is doing good, but I feel like if we had just like one meeting or something like that where we could talk in person about things.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm perfectly fine with doing a review session, and we could find a place to do it. Where we can all be in the same room and still be socially distanced and things like this. Probably in the classroom where the class was originally scheduled would work fine. Generally, when I do review sessions in preparation for exams, I come and I'm basically there to answer your questions that you have about the material. So generally, it would be good if you had pre-studied before then, because otherwise I'm like, okay, well, what do you guys need? What do you guys need help with? And then there's nothing but silence. And I'm like, okay, well, why are we here? Because I can't just, in an hour session with you before the exam, I can't reteach you all the things that we've gone over with in the last 2.5 or 3 weeks. That's not really possible. But what I can do is I can clarify things that you've gone through your notes and you're like, okay, I'm still sketchy on this particular idea or this particular section, things like that. We can totally do that.
Yeah, well, that's just the main point, is where if we do like a review session in person, just since we probably won't have in-person class, I don't know.
Well, Olivia wants in-person class. So that's on the table, assuming that we don't sit in the same room without our masks on and things like that. So I guess what I need to know for you, if we meet in person, what's going to be different?
I personally think it'll take away some of this awkward hesitation of talking, in my opinion, if we're all there together versus trying to communicate online and just being awkward.
Okay. What about the rest of you?
I feel like for me, I think online's going good. I feel like it's a lot more convenient for everybody because I know some people aren't at school right now and they have other stuff they have to do before class. So I feel like it's a lot more convenient. And then if we are in person, then we have like a more tendency to not stay on track. We're online, if we just go through the presentations and whatever, I feel like we stay on track pretty good.
But staying on track isn't necessarily the goal, Blake. Learning is actually the goal. And so, no, if we wanted to be staying on track and getting all the material covered, I can blaze through this material, especially if you guys don't say anything ever. But I don't know that that's necessarily the best way for you guys to learn. Winston, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so like I kind of feel the same way about like the awkwardness of like the Zoom call, but I feel like if we were to use breakout rooms maybe once or twice throughout the class, like each period, like if you went over a concept and then sent us into a breakout room for 5 minutes maybe, and then us as like a small group of 3 or 4 people talk about it amongst ourselves so we can kind of hear what everyone's saying, because I feel like especially with today, everyone in my group was more inclined to talk and share their opinion in the small group setting rather than the class. So I feel like just initiating breakout rooms maybe once or twice throughout each class period.
Was part of that I wasn't there all the time?
A little bit, because I feel like some of it is judgment and the fear of being wrong, because I feel like
everybody's wrong sometime.
Exactly, but I feel like in that small group session, everyone can, and I mean sometimes you're half right, and they can kind of get their opinion out and you can learn something from everyone, and people are more inclined to speak in that setting.
Yeah. So here's one of the things. So you're more comfortable in a group where I'm not sitting there. Don't be afraid to talk simply because you think you might be wrong. If you're wrong, I will correct what's wrong with it. I hope that I never ridicule you because you're wrong, because that would just be terrible of me. But when I ask you questions, I want you guys to answer me. And seldom is there an answer that you would give me that's so wrong that there's not some kernel that I can grab onto and then ask you leading questions to get you to what the right answer is. So I guess one thing, I'm not seeing anybody but Olivia saying, yes, I want to go to in-class meetings. And if you do feel that way, I need to know about that. But if we're not going to do that, then, but even in-class settings, you know, if you feel like I'm intimidating you or something about, and you're afraid of being wrong, then we need to get past that, because I would rather you contribute and be wrong or partially wrong than to not contribute at all. When you give me a wrong answer to a question, that gives me some insight as to what your misunderstandings are about the stuff that we've been covering. And so even your wrong answers are useful to me as I then continue to talk about whatever that topic is. So I can oftentimes in a class read your body language and tell when you're uncomfortable with something. That's a little harder to do via a digital way of doing things. So I actually need you to talk more in order for me to be effective at teaching you, because it's less clear to me in this environment what you're understanding and what you're not understanding. And so if you don't understand something, you really need to tell me. And when I ask a question, try and answer it, even if you think you might not be great at framing the answer, because the way you frame the answer will give me some hints as to what your misunderstandings are. So let's do this for now. Let's continue online. Let's talk about this for a few minutes at the beginning of class on Wednesday again. Think about it a little more as we go. And then as we start into Wednesday, I'll try and figure out some ways of making more breakout room sessions and things like that for you to kind of process the information amongst yourselves. And we'll see if we can't kind of up our game in terms of learning as we move forward. All right, so think of any other ideas between now and Wednesday, and we'll debrief again at the beginning of class on Wednesday. All right, I'll see you guys then.